of owning a cafe and other heroic deeds by Beware the Tristero. Chapter 149. Hell. Part 1. Rappa Kendo knew, regardless of what the kind group he'd been integrating his blunt ass into for the past 4 years tried to tell him, that he was fundamentally dumb as all fuck. Oi! What the hell have you been declining my calls, shitty priest? And that fact, though he tried to forget about it from time to time, had never been more poignant than now. If you continue to snarl and grunt at me like a wild boar, then I'll end this conversation right now. Don't! He snapped through a stage whisper, his burly form pacing like a caged tiger in the nearest alleyway he'd been able to sneak off to under the guise of taking a piss, his eyes frantically snapping to the dingy black road's entrance, where all manner of pigs and pros were huffing and fussing about. Why the fuck didn't you guys tell me that you were doing this today, huh? God. Taishiro was frantic. The kids were a mess. The heroes were rallying, and everyone seemed to be losing their minds. And he, as unlikely as anyone who truly knew him would suspect, was no exception to this. He wasn't supposed to be this concerned, was he? He knew where their cat dad was. He knew why he was there, but... Calm yourself, Rappa. Your shock and surprise neither do look genuine. Tengai Heijiki replied demurely, with all the care of someone mindlessly commenting on the weather. Do forgive Overhaul-sama for not believing in your innate acting skills, won't you? Gritting his teeth, his yellow eyes narrowing upon the street where the eatery owner's phone and severed hair tie had been found, the brawler puffed out a breath. You didn't hurt him none, right? Oh. The reserved prick hummed. He needed to be subdued, of course, but unless he does anything stupid, I'm sure that he'll remain relatively unharmed. He furthered before a short, dry, humorless juggle left him. How very unlike you to care about such things. The teacher's been good to me, he gutted with a growl. Now look, I gotta go. The boss wants his intel, right? He huffed, that strange feeling in the pit of his stomach worsening as he spoke. Tell him he can count on me, but he needs to keep his side of the bargain too, alright? I want the teacher to go home in one piece, you know? I owe him, hecky. And Yakuza always repay their debts, right? No, the other conceded. And to that end, your new burner phone will be waiting for you in the usual place at 11:30 on Tuesday. He furthered. If anything changes in the meantime, use this one. Oh, and keep an ear out for when All Might is returning. He added as though that was something he wouldn't be listening out for. Fucking prick. Yeah, I know, he grumbled, the tightening in his gut clenching a bit more. This better not blow up in our faces, he added, his brows furrowing. Just do your job, Rappa, his self-proclaimed babysitter sniped. Even you can manage that, can't you? Hissing, his hand nearly crushing his phone, the undercover criminal watched the call die before roughly shoving the device into his jeans pocket, his body then stalking out of the alleyway and towards the flurry of activity where Taishiro was talking to that Kencap and the detective guy. Then, his face trying to look friendly, he made his way over to Tamaki, Mirio, and their two teammates. Whilst regarding the pigs scurrying around within the area they'd cordoned off their various scanners and tools, finding nothing. In any other circumstances, he'd find this hilarious. It was different when you knew the people being affected by such things, though, wasn't it? Any news? He asked, his eyes desperately trying not to meet those of his partner's protege as he moved to stand amongst them, his looming form hovering closest to Sun Eater. Handong-sensei arrived a few minutes ago, the ice quirk user answered, his gray eyes narrowed whilst his tightly folded arms creased further, his fingers drumming his bare biceps in a nervous staccato. He seems pretty sure this Shoni got jumped by at least 5 people, and the bastards living here, their windows overlooking the street, apparently saw nothing. He added, his form icing up whilst he glared at the twitching curtains hiding nosy civilians overhead. Maskin is fine to get mad, but you need to cap your quirk, you know, the girl offered whilst nudging him. Our senpais might send us away if they think we're stressing too much, right? She furthered before, much to his chagrin, the periwinkle-haired hero trainee turned those big doleful eyes on him. And now, what do you think happened, Rappa-san? She asked, her question causing him to balk. Well, I was just wondering, she bushed whilst peering up at him curiously. I mean, you're not a pro, you're not with the police force, and being a bouncer makes you pretty shady, doesn't it? she continued obliviously, her body pushed into his personal space as he grunted. So as an outsider, what you think? Oh, come on, tell me, I really want to know. We can handle it, and you might come up with something that the other adults haven't, right? You want to do everything you can to help us find Shoni and the villains who took him, don't you? Snorting, his own arms crossing, the brawler coughed and looked away from her, his hackles lowering a little, even as the other pros in the making regarded him. For someone to go through this kind of trouble to grab the teach, I think he's got to be okay. He managed, his shoulders rolling in a shrug. Why'd they take him? I guess you could take your pick of reasons. He added, the same unease that had been plaguing him since Taishiro's emergency response console woke them still there and growing. He's messed with villains before, hasn't he? Well, then he's probably mounted all kind of enemies because of that. Man, that's without the enemies who've gone after him because of all the pro friends he has. He suggested without realizing that the non-costumed kids were balking at him. Oh, well, let's not forget that fancy brand school of yours. Aren't gangs always targeting that place? Just because he's a part-timer there doesn't mean he's not been spotted and trailed by someone with a grudge, does it? He mused, his head shaking ruefully before his mouth slamming shut. He turned back to the teens where Tabaki audibly gasped, his eyes tearing even as Mirio moved to hold him. Oi! Come on, kid. He's probably fine, you know? Look, if someone wanted him dead, to send a message to that Nezu guy or anyone else, then we'd have found a body here, right? Hey, I'm sorry, alright? He fumbled his hands, gesticulating wildly as even Nejire started to wail, all of their faces becoming peaky as the reality of the situation finally dawned on them. No way, no one would want to do that to him. He's one of the best people in the world. They couldn't. He helps people. You can't have enemies like that. Oh, fuck. Shoni could be being tortured? Dead? They'd probably been trying to convince themselves that this wasn't the hellish nightmare situation it actually was. I think I'm going to be sick. Not scared. I'm sorry, Oh, fucking shit. This isn't on you or Appa-san. I need to call my brother. God. Where's Doshiji? He needs to be here. Mirio? What about Maraiji? Get Natsuji on the line. Come on. They'd probably been thinking that their beloved cat dad was going to come jogging around the next corner. The whole disappearing act, some silly mistake they'd made through thinking the worst. He was not so good at this, was he? It felt like they'd been driving for hours, and for all he knew, they had been. Bzz, bzz, bzz. It was strange, really. Bzz, bzz, bzz. They'd pulled into various places, the van lurching to a stop, the engine dying before starting up and going again. Bzz, bzz, bzz. Then his body stabbed twice more by the son of a bitch with the body-slamming quirk. He'd been pulled out of the van and transferred to another van for a shorter drive before they'd foisted him into an ambulance. Bzz, bzz, bzz. The sirens had blared, the vehicle itself had sped and acted as though it were the real thing, desperate to transport a patient to the hospital. Bzz, bzz, bzz. Not that the noise lasted for too long, no. Soon the call ebbed and died away, the ambulance slumming and veering in circles as it wound down into an underground area before crawling in a snail's pace. Bzz, bzz, bzz. It was disorienting, maddening, and just when he thought he'd come to a rational conclusion about his abduction, bzz, bzz, bzz. His mind certain that someone with a quirk kink wanted his erasure and nothing more. Bzz, bzz, bzz. One of the faceless, nameless men finally answered the bastard phone he knew some prick had put next to his ear on purpose just to add to his discomfort. Oi! Why the hell have you been declining my calls, shitty priest? His breath had caught in his throat. If you continue to snarl and grunt at me like a wild boar, then I'll end this conversation right now. The priest had put the call on loudspeaker, and to his growing horror, don't! Why the fuck didn't you guys tell me that you were doing this today, huh? He recognized that voice. Calm yourself, Rappa. Your shock and surprise needed to look genuine. Do forgive Overhaul-sama for not believing in your innate acting skills, won't you? Oh, God! You didn't hurt him none, right? He'd been betrayed by someone he'd welcomed into his cafe. Welcomed into the lives of his friends, his family, their kids. He almost couldn't believe it. God, he felt so stupid. Hadn't people warned him time and time again that his policy of acceptance of trust would come back to bite him? Oh, he needed to be subdued, of course, but unless he does anything stupid, I'm sure that he'll remain relatively unharmed. And just to add insult to injury, the smarmy prick who was tolerating the conversation between himself and the traitorous bastard who'd be acting the innocent amongst the people he loved so much dared to run his long, cool fingers down his cheek in a distinctly intimate gesture, the tips of his digits slinking past his jaw to graze his neck. How very unlike you to care about such things. He shuddered at the motion, his stomach turning in vile hatred and disgust whilst he grit his teeth. The cheats has been good to me. Now look, I gotta go. The boss wants his intel, alright? Tell him he can count on me, but he needs to keep his side of the bargain too, alright? I want Teach to go home in one piece, you know? I owe him, Heki. And Yakuza always repay their debts, right? Heki? He'd be sure to remember that name. No one other than his husband was allowed to touch him in such a way. And to that end, your burner phone will be waiting for you in the usual place at 11:30 on Tuesday. If anything changes in the meantime, use this one. Oh, and keep an ear out for when All Might is returning. Trying his best to hiss at the fiend, he redoubled his attempts to move, his mind willing an awakening of his quirk or something, anything. Yeah, I know. This better not blow up in our faces. Oh, he thought you just fucking wait! Just do your job, Rappa. Even you can manage that, can't you? Then, the call ending with a decisive click, Shouta could do nothing more but silently seethe as Heki readjusted himself next to his futon and silence returned to the equipment-free ambulance's interior. They'd purposely allowed him to hear all of that, hadn't they? They were no doubt trying to scare and intimidate him, but his kidnappers had done quite the opposite. This had set a fire under him, and without meaning to, they'd given him information he could use. He was dealing with Yakuza! That meant that his original theory might be wrong. If they were looking out for his husband, then this whole thing was potentially about revenge. Or, since he hadn't been hurt and such crime syndicates were dying out, money. He knew these kinds of people. He knew that they would be like Boss-sama, their motives driven by greed and a kind of honor, a kind of code that they believed in, and he could work with that. He'd excelled when undergoing hostage-based situation assessments during his pro-hero training. He'd even surprised himself at the commonalities he'd found in villain profiles, the standard psychology of such groups making an odd kind of logical sense. A logic that he could exploit. We're finally here. Oi, Mimic, does he need to be stuck with the minute hand?
Now the great Almighty's kitten is just as weak as that ridiculous pet name suggests. And besides, Overhaul wants to speak to him now.
The bulky man thumped chuffed whilst those fingers threaded through his hair.
It's better that he's fully coherent for when he meets his new master, don't you think?
Being an hour ahead of his homeland, Yagi Aizawa Toshinori lamented as the basic alarm clock rang to life in the muted sunshine of his lackluster accommodation. Really wasn't helpful. Oh, shit. Not just because it created an even further sense of distance between himself and his family, but because he was the world's greatest moron! Oh yes, Sorohigo had been right to call him such things in his youth during his hellish training, hadn't he? God, here he was, draped in a nearly dry towel and sprawled on the small stiff-foamed mattress, his body just waking at 5. He'd left the shower last night, tousled his hair dry, laid down with the full intentions of picking up his phone, and then... blam! Even out like a light. "You're a stupid old bad person, Rory," he berated himself, his left hand shutting off the infernal beeping whilst his right reached for his phone. His phone that he should have used last night to call his husband to enjoy some quality time with him. However, to his further dismay, the blasted thing was dead! "You couldn't call him anyway. It's 4 back home and he gets such precious little sleep as it is." he sighed while scrubbing at his face. "You don't deserve that, man," he further grumbled before shoving his arm between the bed and side table to flick the damned power outlet on. Well, there was no use in sitting around moping, was there? And so, with a huff, he got up and made his way to the small plain pine wardrobe to pull out his sparring gear while sending a silent prayer to his lover that he'd speak to him soon. By the time he'd finished putting the young pups through their paces, all of them enjoying breakfast together and signing autographs for the more dedicated fans who'd camped outside their hotel, it was 9:10. Knowing his husband, the routine lover would have gone for his run, showered, seen to their beloved cats, and finished serving up breakfast to their son and his friends by now, wouldn't he? Chuckling to himself, he thought nothing of jumping into the shower once more just to be on the safe side. Then, knowing that it'd be 8:30 at home, he reached for his phone and opened up the private chat he shared with his kitten, his brows lifting a fraction when he saw that the man hadn't been online since 5:40 Japanese time. That was odd, wasn't it? Knock, knock. "It's open," he called, his fingers moving to the little keyboard. God, he'd not even texted back that he loved his partner last night, had he?
"The Americans have requested that we get the signing underway at 9.
Murnau greeted as he entered, 2 cups of coffee in hand, his eyes rolling.
"I've never understood your fondness for them, you know,"
he furthered on approach, his brows lifting when he no doubt saw his scowl.
"Is everything all right, Toshi?"
"I'm just wallowing in the shame of not deserving my husband, that's all," he replied with a little shrug. "He's not been online for a while,"
he furthered, his frown deepening. The future seer offered, after placing the insulated plastic-topped cup he'd brought for him upon the bedside table.
"It's funny you should mention that. Atsuhiro has been a little reserved during our text this morning, too," he hummed. "They're probably busily preparing for the next round of birthdays,"
he assured, his smile spreading.
"After your big bash, the kids are probably insisting on all manner of things, aren't they?"
Chuckling, his head shaking ruefully, he smiled and raised his cup at him.
"Yes, you're probably right,"
he added before taking a sip.
"I'll give him a call later. Now, what do you think I should wear,
he asked, his phone placed to one side as he got up to approach his wardrobe, the pair of them going over his suits and costumes until the best option had been decided. Then, his form dressed, teeth brushed, and hair flicked into its iconic style, he and his best friend ventured towards the exit. It was 10 o'clock, 9 back home. The device he'd not given a second glance towards, as the door closed behind them and locked shut, was now illuminated as call after call flooded through.